I'm not sure how familiar people on the call are with OneNote, but I thought I'd do just a little tour of basic OneNote capabilities because that's pretty essential to understand how you're going to use OneNote. Talk a little bit about how OneNote is integrated with NAV, and then discuss the possible, we should also give you some idea of possible advantages of using OneNote with NAV. What I'll do is throw out some ideas, some concepts on how you can use it. As I'll emphasize throughout this, it's important that you get to know OneNote. If you don't know it, understand again how it works with NAV, and then use your imagination. So in terms of how you could use OneNote with NAV in your present circumstance. So we'll look at all of that. So session agenda again follows those objectives: basics of OneNote, how OneNote integrates into NAV, and then some ideas for using OneNote. So let's talk about OneNote itself. Again, I don't know how familiar people are with OneNote. The bottom line is OneNote is just a old-fashioned, modeled after an old-fashioned paper notebook, but it's in electronic form, which means, great, it's a paper notebook, but it is a whole lot different. It has been part of the MS Office package since 2007, which is actually back when I started using NAV. I will say I have looked at OneNote over the years. I was a Mac user, still am a Mac user for quite a while, and decided to go with Evernote when OneNote was in its infancy. Evernote is an app that's multi-platform and has a lot of it's actually a competitor to OneNote. But I will say now I have been using OneNote a lot, and I think it's really developed, as I mentioned here on the slide. It's gotten a whole lot deeper in terms and richer over the years in terms of its functionality. They started offering a free version in 2013, again responding to competitors like Evernote and other people out there. And it is now cross-platform. So I have OneNote loaded on my iPad, it's on my Mac, it's on my iPhone, and it's got a rich feature set on most of the platforms. So really, it's typical Microsoft just built it into a very feature-rich kind of tool that you can use personally or in business. So one thing that's a little confusing, and I will confess is a little confusing now to me even, is OneNote versus OneNote 2016. So starting with Windows 10, if you're a Windows 10 user, there are two versions. So there's OneNote, which is installed with the OS on Windows 10 and works with any PC, tablet, phone, or Mac. So that's the version that's going to look more multi-platform. There's also OneNote 2016, which is sold with the Office suite and is compatible with earlier versions of Windows. So it kind of depends on what version of Windows you're on. When we get into looking at things live, you will see that we're using one with NAV. It's really OneNote 2016, because that's what I'm using on my desktop. So that's what NAV brings up. The differences aren't easy to summarize. I have included a link you can see for Office support, from Office support, that explains the differences between these two. The good news is that you can use either one or both. So it's not necessary to absolutely make a choice, but Microsoft will tell you that the new features are showing up in OneNote. So pay attention to it, which I'm doing, even if you prefer to use OneNote 2016. And I will show you this. This is the link. So you get, if you click on the link, you'll get a funny little guy doing a demo. Kind of hip little guy, kind of looks like me, but it's not me. and it'll talk about OneNote for Windows 10, talk about OneNote 16, and then give a summary of the features that are available in OneNote, only in OneNote 10, and the ones that are available only in OneNote 2016. So, you know, again, click on that link if you're a Windows 10 user to find out what the differences are. Okay. So going back to the presentation, let's go to the next page. So let's take a little glimpse at functionality. So with OneNote, again, obviously you can take notes, but here you see you can include Outlook meeting details in the notes. So you can, if you're having a meeting, and I'll try and do a little demo here. So let me see, is this the version I want? So here's a OneNote. Hopefully you can see that. And there's nothing in there. But if I want to do the meeting detail, if I want to take notes about this meeting, I can click on meeting details and it'll say, oh, okay, well, you're in a GoToWebinar, and it'll pop all the meeting details in here. Hopefully you can see these. There's the invitation message. I can expand that. I can expand the participants, which is, again, there was only one, that was Angie, but if we're in a GoToWebinar meeting, it would have all the participants. So you can have all of that, and then you can just start taking your meeting notes. So I've used this. It's a nice little feature when I'm doing an online meeting. It automatically tells me who the meeting participants. I don't have to, it reminds me the date and the time. I don't have to do anything else. So let's go back to so that's one example of kind of the wonders of OneNote. Here we go. Another example, and I think I found this useful, is you can insert objects of all kinds. So you can insert a Visio diagram, for example, or a spreadsheet, and edit them. Now, I will say this is one of those differences between OneNote 2016 and OneNote itself. So when I insert this, let me see if I can get to this easily. So when oops, this is the wrong one. I'll get to this one actually when we talk about. It'll be easier to get to this when we talk about OneNote and NAV. So I'm using this as an example. When it's in 2016, you can actually click on this diagram and it'll bring up Visio, edit it in Visio, save it, and the new diagram will be saved in your OneNote note. Same thing with spreadsheets. So if you want to do that kind of interactive stuff with Office, that's where OneNote 2016, the desktop version, integrates better than OneNote itself. But I found this to be another useful feature. And then again, this is also OneNote 2016. You can actually put templates in there. You can use a template, and you can use, again, you can get this is a very simple template, personal meeting note template. Again, I found this useful to use. There are much more complex templates. There's a whole load of templates. This is a OneNote 2016 feature. But you can also tag items, these little stars and boxes, etc. That's a to-do tag. There's also a discuss with person tag. You can indicate by clicking on the tag when a task is done. You can make a task an Outlook task. We'll look at that a little bit. And then there's a variety of tags. The tags are in both versions. So you can use tags in both versions. There's more tags in OneNote 2016, but they are in both versions. So that gives you a little feel about OneNote, but there is a lot more in OneNote. OneNote, you can do drawings. One of the kind of cool things you can do is, let's see, go to draw. So I am terrible at using drawings, right? But if I wanted to draw something, excuse me, let me get to it. So I pick a pen, and oops, sorry, my mouse is not cooperating with me here. Well, anyway, and do ink to shape. So if I do a circle, you can see how bad a drawer I am. It'll automatically, I've selected ink to shape up here. It'll automatically draw the circle to shape. You know, how useful is that? Well, if you draw as bad as I do, that's useful. And it'll recognize, circles and squares, etc. But I just thought that was an amusing little feature that you could possibly use. And obviously, if you're using a tablet notebook, we use surfaces here. You can use the pen, and that becomes even more functional. You can take voice notes. You can share notes with various apps. Obviously, there's some collaborative features in this. You can share, one thing about OneNote, and we do this at Innovia. We share notebooks, so we have notebooks from client meetings, etc., and we share those with each other. You can capture images from the device camera directly into a note. That's a OneNote feature, by the way. I don't think it's a OneNote 2016 feature. You can record video. You can print something directly to OneNote, so OneNote can receive printouts. And just as the drawing, what you saw with the drawing, it'll also convert handwriting to text. All of those things are subject to how good your handwriting is. There's actually a feature in OneNote where you can do math, and I've tried using that in the handwriting, and it just doesn't recognize my handwriting that well. So all those things are obviously keep improving, but lots of functionality is the point. On and on. New features are added. It's a very competitive market space. Things I haven't mentioned here are you can link to websites. You can capture images from anywhere. Lots of things you can do with OneNote. So the functionality is pretty rich, and we'll see some more when we get to using OneNote with NAV. So again, not a comprehensive tour, but hopefully that gives you a little feeling about how you can use OneNote. So let's talk about OneNote with NAV. If not familiar, you probably see the icon in NAV. Again, once if you're on 2013 or more, right? It was integrated with NAV as of 2013. So you've probably seen that, but if you haven't used it, you have no idea about how to set it up. So it's very easy to set up OneNote. And you can store your notes, by the way, on a file server on OneDrive or SharePoint. So you don't have to be using SharePoint or OneDrive, but again, that's what we do more often. There's an instruction link I've included in this, the instruction link for how to set up OneNote with NAV. But what I'll show you is pretty much it, right? So you really set up OneNote, you set OneNote up by roles. So again, this obviously 2013 role tailored client. And you specify either record, which is write, and or use, which is read. So you're just specifying read-write access. And you can, one thing that's important, I'll show you the screen where you set it up, the profile page. You can have different roles access different notebooks. So the notes are only visible to a specific role. So this probably will look a little clearer when you see this page. Hopefully you can see it. So this is just the profile page. So this is use record notes, that's notebook. You specify your notebook. You can see ours are on SharePoint. All these three roles where this is set up, sales and relationship manager, purchasing agent, and business manager, are all using the same notebook, but they could be using different notebooks, right? And also you could use different notebooks and say for one role that they could use the page notes but not record. So you can click either one of them. In our demo case, we've got both clicked. That's how we set it up normally. The other thing is when you set this up, the OneNote button becomes active for all the pages where it's available. So there's no other security other than what I'm showing you. This is really just how OneNote gets set up. So it's very simple. Once you know where you're going to store your OneNotes, it's very easy. The constraint is, again, it's by role, and it's by these profiles by role, and once you have access to it, you have access to it in every for every record, every table. Again, assuming you have security access to records and tables, the records and tables. But once you have that, you have access to OneNote. So when it's available for a role and an object, it shows up on the right. It shows up highlighted. You can see my wonderful circle there again. On the right side of the ribbon. On the right side of the ribbon. That doesn't mean there is a OneNote for that particular record. It just means that there's a record for that particular record. So again, there's no indicator, and there's no fact box to my knowledge that would show you there's a OneNote. So you really have to click on OneNote to see the note and see if there's a note. That's one of the distinctions in terms of functionality. Let me go to actually customers. So here's an example where we've got a customer. And so if I click on OneNote here, I'm having a little trouble with my mouse there. If I click on OneNote, boom. The OneNote comes up for that customer, right? If I go to another customer, that customer has a note. This customer doesn't have a note, so you won't see the note for this customer. This one does, etc. So it's as easy as that. If you want to hide OneNote, you just minimize it, and boom, you're back into NAV, right? But as you can see, there's nothing. If I go to the different customers, the notes will start coming up, but there's nothing that really indicates whether there's a note or not. Whereas in fact boxes here, oops, oh, I see one. You can see if there is a note, but not a OneNote. So there we go. So there's OneNote and NAV. Oops. So. Oh, and another point that I want to make here is there's effectively only one note per record. So one thing, you'll see if I go back here, Sorry, I'm having a little trouble navigating between the different screens here. Oops. Here we go. So if I go back here and I click on OneNote, right? And this is the record where I had a note. Hopefully I'll see that. Yeah. If I now kind of go and show the commands and ribbons. Come on. There we go. You do see there's something called pages. If I go to next page, or if I want to create a new page, if I created a new page, you'll notice this says link to new concepts furniture. So there's the customer. That's where it's linked. If I create a new page, I am just creating a new page in the section of customer. There's no link here, right? So if I go to the previous page, it'll actually start showing me other customers, right? So that's one thing that can be a little confusing. Just be careful. You're really only doing one note per record, right? Let's go back to document. So that is, that's really the basics. Oh yeah, the other thing I wanted to point out actually, sorry, is that this is really what's happening in the background of OneNote. So there is actually a OneNote notebook that's created, right? And you can see that there's a sales header. So that's the record. If there's a sales record, we'll look at this record later on. And so each object, customer, item, contact, sales header, is a section in the notebook, and then the link to each specific record is a page in OneNote. So that's how it's translated. And you can get to this notebook, by the way, and go in directly and edit the notes in just using OneNote. So that's the other piece of kind of background information in terms of what goes on behind the scenes a little bit with OneNote and NAV. So let's talk about using OneNote for NAV. Now you know what OneNote does basically. Hopefully you have some feel for that. You can easily take up a whole session going through what OneNote does do and can do. And you have a little idea of how OneNote is integrated with NAV. It's very easy to set up. And what goes behind the scenes conceptually, frankly, is fairly simple. So let's talk about using OneNote for NAV. And I mentioned when you turn on OneNote for any role, it's enabled for the objects where the OneNote icon shows up. Well, that's basically for every object. I started listing out the objects. You can see customers, contacts, etc. It just goes on and on. If you go through your menu and click on all of these, you will see, yes, you could have a OneNote note for sales credit memos. Even requests to approve, you could have a OneNote note. Certificates of supplies. You know, I'm not saying that you should have used OneNote in any of these particular cases, but the point here is really the options are somewhat endless. You can do many things with OneNote if you have the mind to. It's really, as it says here, up to your imagination to figure out how to use it. And I will put a note in here that I'll probably repeat later is I'd love to hear if any of you on this webinar are using OneNote, how you're using it, where you're using it, and if in any way this inspires you to play with OneNote and use it in your implementation, I'd love to hear back from you how you're using it. I'd like some more real-world user examples on how you're using OneNote. So just what I'm going to do now is just talk conceptually from my point of view. This is my perspective on it. How you use OneNote with NAV, where I see you using it and not using it, and then give some show you some examples, talk through some examples. And this is really, again, just to plant seeds in your imagination about how you can use it. I would say if you're just using simple text, use notes. It'll show up in the fact box. It's a functionality in NAV. It's easy to use. If it's just some plain text note like make sure you call this person, or there was a question about X or Y or Z, or some additional information about a vendor invoice, anything like that, just use notes. If you want to attach a document or multiple documents, then I'd say a document management solution. ZetaDocs comes with NAV, a simple version of ZetaDocs. We use that in our demo database. That's a better solution. But I will say this also, because I've had one customer recently say, well, I don't really want to, I'd like to use attached documents. I'd like to be able to do that more pervasively in my system, but I don't really want to spend the money on a full-blown implementation of ZetaDocs. And depending on what you do, you could use OneNote to do that. You can, as I said, you can insert a document, multiple documents, into a OneNote note. Again, remember, there's only one note per record, right? So if you're attaching documents to a customer record, for instance, they're all going to be in OneNote. That's okay, but they'll all be in OneNote. And using OneNote is a little clumsy compared to the kind of drag and drop functionality. It won't show up in a fact box. You can see ZetaDocs documents or other document management solutions in a fact box, but it could be an alternative. But that's not personally where I see using OneNote a lot. So I think OneNote is better for more complex notes. That's just an obvious kind of generalization. One example is where you're going to benefit from using full formatting kind of capabilities. So let's look at an example here. Well, we'll look at examples. I'll look at the slides. But if you're using really full, it's a complex note. There's bullet points, there's to-dos, etc. Use OneNote for those kind of things. You can use it. I showed the living documents. I showed I think a Visio diagram in a previous slide. Again, using OneNote 2016, you can insert spreadsheets and Visio diagrams, and you can edit them so information will be kept up to date. I'll show you an example of that. You can do it right from OneNote. And you can use it when you want to put related and what I'd call compound information into a note. That way that compound information is available at a glance. You can't do that with notes. You can't do that with document management. So if, for example, you're recording a meeting, you want a meeting, you maybe have a scanned image, you want to have some Outlook tasks, because you can use Outlook tasks in OneNote. If you want to do all those and you want it in one single place for somebody to view, that's a good place to use OneNote. So let's look at a couple of examples. So let's say you have a vendor review meeting and you want to document that. And then there's things that are going to be to-dos, etc., that you want to, things you want to tag in some way. That's a good example of using OneNote. So let me switch to that. And whoops, I brought it didn't mean to bring up my customer card. Excuse me. Having a little trouble with my mouse. Sorry about that once again. So let's go to customers. Let's go up here. Again, apologies for the technical difficulties, but okay. Now, slide. Here we go. So let me move forward through this. Customers. No. So let's look at vendors. So this is an example of OneNote where it's a more complex note. So this I actually used a template. I mentioned again, this is a OneNote 2016. I used a template. I had a vendor review meeting. I had it divided into most important points, to-dos, and questions requiring follow-ups. By the way, one of the things, this will come up in this docked to the right-hand mode, but you can actually, from here, from NAV, go to the full view of this and see the full view. Again, I mentioned that you can do things that you can insert. Again, this is 2016. Here's all the things you can insert: screen clippings, pictures, online pictures, spreadsheet diagram. This is the 2016 version again. Page templates. This meeting document is a page template for a simple meeting, but there's lots of page templates. You know, I'm not going to go through them, all of them, but the point is there's lots of page templates you can use. So, and this also indicates, again, shows you, you know, this is sales header, there's vendor. So you could actually, these are not connected to a vendor. You can actually kind of page through all the notes if you wanted to from here. But we'll go back to the normal docked view, dock to desktop view when you're in NAV. And I click on that vendor, Progressive Home Furnishings, and it should bring the note back up. Yeah, so that's where you saw no OneNote. So there's, and again, all these things have some functionality. So, you know, if you wanted to have a meeting, have a vendor review meeting, create an Outlook task, you can create an Outlook task. And you can forward that to anybody, you can assign it to everybody, etc. This links directly with Outlook. So let me go back to the PowerPoint again. And that. So, there we are. Sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. So that's the meeting. Here's another example where you've, in this case, it includes a comment from customer service. So again, this is the compound kind of document that I'm talking about. So this is where we had an order, 1010. There's the link. Here's the OneNote note. So says receive this order with an unintelligible PDF. Here's the scan of the PDF inserted into the document, asking the salesperson to check on this. And then I said, please check on this fax with the order. We believe we should ignore the fax. You certainly should. It's a receipt for an Italian restaurant in New Jersey. So that will lead to, yes, you will create a OneNote, an Outlook task. It's automatically generated. This obviously went to me. I actually assigned it to somebody else playing around with this. When it's marked completed, that red box here will turn into a green check. So you'll be able to see it if you come back to this note. So that's an example. And when somebody clicks, so anybody receiving this, when they click on this OneNote, that link to the OneNote, they will be taken to what we saw before. So they'll be actually taken to this particular, the note in OneNote itself, right? It doesn't bring up NAV, it takes you to the note in OneNote itself. So in the notebook that you've defined for NAV. So again, this is a kind of, if you think of kind of CRM applications or things related to that, that's, you know, again, I think this kind of compound information, assigning tasks, again, I'm just trying to kind of trigger your imagination. This is certainly the kind of thing you can do. So then the other thing, I mentioned a living document. So I'll bring up this example. Obviously, we're a technology company. We deal with customers who have complex technologies. So the example I'll bring up, I'll get to hopefully get control of my mouse again and get to back into NAV and show you this. But this is where we've got a customer, and I've embedded this document, which is a multi-generation plan, into the document, into the oh, that's customer order. So I need to get down here. Oops. I want to assure you, OneNote is not this difficult. That my problems moving around have more to do with doing the presentation and webinar, and go to webinar and managing multiple screens. So this is vendors. If I go to customers, yeah, let me get to customers here. Let's do customer. There we go. Here's the note. So this is the multi-generation plan. So I say here's below is this customer's multi-year plan. Use it for planning sales and marketing efforts for system work. And if I click on this and edit, there we go. It'll bring this up. And I can do anything to, whoops, bring it up in Excel. I can edit it. Just say key systems functional area. Save that. Hopefully, save that the old way. No, save it. And then, you may have to take this on faith because once again, I'm having some problem with my, it's just difficult moving my mouse around. But if I did go back to, if I were able, here we go. Go back to customers. You can see this now says key systems functional area. So again, you can make, the point here is you can put living documents into a OneNote, again, using OneNote 2016, and have those updated continuously, and then just show up whenever anybody wanted to look at the OneNote for the customer. If you've got information that would be useful that way. You can also, we had another example here. Hopefully I can get to this easily. Yep. Yeah, this would be another case where, again, there's a document here. If you had a job and you wanted to specify things, it clearly wouldn't look like this. This is a cellular factory layout. It's just a grid, but there's a conceptual overview of what we're, if you want to have more detail around a job, you know, or more specifically, this might be around routing something that's more permanent. You could do that, you could update it, etc. So just some examples. So let's go back to, here, I'll minimize this. Go back to the presentation here. So that gives you hopefully a few three ideas, you know, three examples of how you could possibly use OneNote. With vendors, you know, could be with a specific order. I had an action item, if you remember, around the order. That was this case. This was an order. So there was a note there that, you know, I added a scan image, did an Outlook task, etc. This is a more complex thing, a vendor review meeting. I can, you know, again, I think see using OneNote and NAV where you've got more static data like vendors, customers, etc., and you want to store more complex information about them. And the final example was where you've got a customer and there's some ongoing information about the customer. You know, in this case, it happened to be a spreadsheet. Again, this could be a Visio flow. It could be a number of things where there's some ongoing information about a customer we want to keep up to date. We just store it in here with other notes and, you know, are able to access it from OneNote. So once again, the point of all this is using OneNote and NAV, just use your imagination. Once you understand the wonders of OneNote, I think it's really important if you are going to use OneNote that you just spend some time playing with it, exploring the capabilities, maybe use it personally. I use it all the time. I use it for all of our information, my information with clients, and share it with the team. So. But, you know, play around with it, get to know it, and then start to think about, geez, how could I use this with customers? How could I use this with vendors? Would this be useful beyond simple notes with orders or with invoices, with vendor invoices, whatever? Just start thinking of it. Start thinking about it again in your specific functional area. Enable it for those roles and go to it. And again, as I said, I would love to hear my email address will be at the end of this. I'd love to hear from you about how you might be using it, see some real world examples that would improve presentations like this in the future, and things I can pass on to other customers as well. So at this point, Angie, I think we'll open it up. We're 45 minutes in, open it up to questions and see if anybody's got any questions. Again, I apologize for the problems with moving around. My mouse was not cooperating, but love to hear if there are any questions. Angie?
At this time, no questions have come through, but if anyone does, you are more than welcome to email Bob, and he can be reached at, there it is right there, at Beaird@Innovia.com. So you can email your questions to him, or if you have them right now, we can go ahead and get those answered. But I just want to thank everyone for attending. Thank you, Bob, for this informative information on using MS OneNote with NAV. And just a reminder to everyone that this is recorded, and the webinar and all of our webinars are on our website. So if you go to our website, www.innovia.com, and click on the past events page, this and all of our past webinars are on there. So you can view them and share them with colleagues and so forth. So, well, thank you again, everyone. And we hope to see you at our next webinar, which will be held next Thursday. And that is going to be on NAVUG Summit, and Tom Doran is going to be presenting information on that, and you can find that on our website under the events page. So thanks again, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we hope to see you at our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.